Sí, pues estoy contento por las convenciones, gracias al señor Suleiman, que ha sido buena gente conmigo y cada vez que me...
They called him the Hands of Stone, with fury and fire. But as the years weigh heavy, Roberto Durán faces a crueler opponent than any in the ring: the passage of time. His story is no longer about titles, but survival, legacy, and the fight to remain remembered. No Mas, the infamous fight. The night of November 25, 1980, in the Louisiana Superdome, was supposed to be boxing at its finest. Over 23,000 fans filled the arena, millions more tuned in at home, and the air itself buzzed with anticipation. Roberto Durán, the proud Panamanian who had carved out a reputation as one of the most fearsome fighters in the sport, was stepping into the ring once again with Sugar Ray Leonard. This was a rematch. Just 5 months earlier in Montreal, Durán had handed Leonard his first professional loss in a brutal 15-round battle. It was a night that seemed to prove once and for all that Durán's ferocity and pressure could break even the most skilled boxer. So when the rematch was announced, the world expected nothing less than another classic. However, what happened instead became one of the most shocking and misunderstood moments in boxing history. The fight began with Leonard clearly determined to rewrite the story. He was sharper, faster, and more tactical. He wasn't the same Leonard who had been drawn into a brawl in Montreal. This time, he was a boxer who wanted to frustrate Durán and humiliate him. Round after round, Leonard wasn't just landing punches, he was putting on a show. At times, he dropped his hands, shuffled his feet, and wound up his punches as if he were toying with his opponent, and the crowd loved every moment. For Durán, a man whose pride was as fierce as his fists, it was infuriating. He had made a career out of intimidating men, out of making them submit to his relentless will. Now, in front of the world, Leonard was doing to him what he had done to so many others. By the 7th round, Leonard had the fight in his hands, and Durán wrapped around his fingers. He was controlling the rhythm, landing quick combinations, and using movement to keep Durán off balance. When they got to the 8th round, something happened, and it changed the way people remembered Roberto Durán forever. With seconds left, in the middle of an exchange, Durán suddenly turned away. He shook his head, waved a glove, and told the referee in Spanish, "No más, no more," and just like that, it was over. The referee stepped in, and Leonard regained his title. The crowd erupted, but it wasn't in celebration alone. Many were confused, stunned, some even angry, because did that really happen? Roberto Durán, the man they called Hands of Stone, the fighter who had built his name on toughness, had quit in the middle of a fight. Commentators scrambled to make sense of what they had seen. Fans booed. Leonard raised his arms in victory, but even he looked puzzled at how abruptly the fight had ended. The boxing world had just witnessed a surrender, not a knockout. The shock didn't end when the bell rang. What happened that night spilled far beyond the ring, leaving the world desperate for answers and forcing everyone to ask, why? In the days and weeks that followed, the moment became bigger than the fight itself. Headlines around the world ran with the phrase, "No Mas." It stuck like glue, and soon it was all anyone could talk about. Why did he do it? What could make a man like Durán, who had battled through punishment before, suddenly throw in the towel without a mark of serious injury? Everyone seemed to have a theory. Some said it was frustration at Leonard's taunts, that Durán's pride couldn't handle being mocked in front of the world, while others claimed he was drained from cutting too much weight. They believed that he had come into the fight physically unprepared. There were even whispers of stomach cramps and illness that night. Excuses Durán himself would sometimes point to later, but excuses didn't soften the blow to his reputation. For fans, it was betrayal. They had looked at Durán as a warrior who embodied grit and toughness. Now, many saw a quitter. To them, it didn't matter what the reason was. They saw him walk away, and that was enough. In sports, certain moments define an athlete no matter what else they accomplish. And for Durán, the words "no más" became a shadow he could never quite escape. But Durán himself never fully accepted the label. In interviews afterward, he insisted he never actually said the words "no más." He claimed what he told the referee was "no sigo," meaning "I won't go on," and that he quit not out of cowardice, but because his body failed him that night. He blamed the brutal weight cut, the stomach cramps, and his manager for pushing him into the fight too soon after Montreal, and there may actually be truth in that. Durán was notorious for gaining weight between fights, and Leonard had forced a quick rematch knowing it would test his discipline. Still, even if every excuse was valid, it made no difference to the public. What they saw was already etched in history. The sting of that night went far beyond that single fight because sponsors began to pull back, and in Panama, many fans felt betrayed. For a man who had risen from poverty to become a symbol of pride for his country, the backlash cut deep. His reputation had been built on toughness and an unbreakable spirit. Yet suddenly, the world saw cracks in the armor. For Leonard, the win was sweet vindication, as he had beaten the man who once humbled him and done so in a way that humiliated his rival. For Durán, it was humiliation of a very different kind. Many athletes never recover from a fall that's steep, and Durán had two choices: let the shame define him or fight on. What came next would decide everything. Would Roberto Durán be remembered forever as the man who quit? Or could he rise again and reclaim the glory the world thought he lost? For most fighters, no mas would have been the end. A moment like that could have buried an entire career, leaving the legacy of a man defined by surrender. Roberto Durán, though, was not most fighters. He was stubborn in the way only the great ones are. He had grown up with nothing, built himself into a world champion, and carried the pride of a nation on his shoulders, so to simply disappear after New Orleans wasn't an option. Instead of letting shame retire him, Durán came back swinging. In 1983, only a few years after that infamous night, he shocked the boxing world again. This time, he went up against Davy Moore, the young, flashy, undefeated champion. Moore was supposed to represent the new generation. He was the kind of fighter meant to send Durán into permanent retirement, but the fight didn't last long, and it told a whole story. Durán fought with the fire of a man who had something to prove. He battered Moore with sharp counters and relentless pressure. By the 8th round, Moore was bloodied and beaten, leaving the referee no choice but to stop the fight. Durán left Madison Square Garden as the new WBA light middleweight champion. In a single night, he transformed from the fighter many believed was finished into the man who humbled a rising star. This win wasn't only about capturing a belt, it was redemption. But he wasn't done. Durán kept going, moving through weight classes and facing names that defined boxing in the 1980s. He fought the best, and even when he lost, he did it against legends like Marvin Hagler and Thomas Hearns. Against Hagler, he went the distance, showing discipline and control that surprised critics who expected him to be overmatched. And against Hearns, he suffered a brutal knockout, one of the hardest punches ever thrown in the ring. Those nights could have pushed him into the background again, but the thing about Durán was that he never stayed down for long. He always came back, always fought on, and always carried with him that dangerous unpredictability. Perhaps his most memorable comeback moment came in 1989, when he faced Iran Barkley for the WBC middleweight title. Barkley was big, powerful, and fresh off a knockout win over Hearns. Durán, by then 37 years old, was considered well past his prime, and only a few gave him a chance. But what unfolded was one of the finest performances of his career. Durán fought with a blend of grit, craft, and perfect timing. In the 11th round, a sharp right hand sent Barkley tumbling to the canvas, and Durán went on to win by split decision, reclaiming a championship once more. The bout was later crowned Fight of the Year, and deservedly so, because it wasn't only about the punches. It was about the story of a fighter written off time and again, proving once more that he still belonged at the top. In that same year, he finally met Leonard again for their long-awaited third fight. This was the moment many fans had been waiting for, with the question of if Durán could erase the sting of 1980 by finally beating Leonard again? Sadly, the answer was no. Leonard boxed carefully, refusing to let Durán drag him into a war, and he won a unanimous decision. For Durán, it was another disappointment, but it didn't end the story because he kept fighting, driven by a need that went beyond wins and losses. But if redemption defined the middle of his career, what came next was something rarer still. Against all odds, Durán refused to fade, carving out a second act in boxing. Durán's career lasted far longer than anyone expected. He fought well into the 1990s, still taking on top opponents and proving he was more than just a relic of the past. His longevity was remarkable. By his 40s, most of his peers had long since retired, yet Durán continued stepping through the ropes, carrying himself like the champion he had always been. He didn't always win, but fans kept watching, eager to see if Hands of Stone still had one more surprise left. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, age was finally catching up to him. His reflexes slowed, his stamina waned, and the younger fighters had the edge. Still, Durán fought on, as if letting go of the sport was harder than taking a punch. His final bout came in 2001 against Hector Camacho, but it wasn't the kind of farewell storybook endings are made of. Durán lost a unanimous decision, and his performance showed clearly that the years had caught up to him. Shortly after, a car accident left him seriously injured and forced him into surgery, which finally closed the book on his fighting days. In January 2002, at age 50, Roberto Durán officially retired from boxing. Think about that for a second. A career that had begun in 1968 stretched across over 3 decades. He fought 119 times, won 103 of those, and captured world titles in 4 different weight classes. He had fought the best of the best, from lightweight to middleweight, and in many cases, he had beaten them. There are fighters who burn bright for a short while and fade, but Durán was something different. He lasted, he endured, and he kept reinventing himself after every setback. The recognition he eventually received was fitting. In 2007, he was inducted into the International Boxing Hall of Fame, a place reserved for the sport's immortals. For Durán, it was a moment of validation, proof that history would not remember him only for no mas. Instead, it would remember the fighter who rose from the slums of Panama to become one of the greatest boxers of all time. The fighter who never let shame keep him down, who found a way to come back again and again. What makes Durán's later career so compelling isn't just the titles or the wins, it's sheer determination. Every time he was counted out, he found a way back. Every time the critics said he was finished, he fought on. And even when he could no longer win at the highest level, he fought because boxing was in his blood. It was who he was. When you look back, his career is less about one infamous moment of surrender and more about a lifetime of defiance. He proved that redemption in sports doesn't come from erasing the past, but from building on top of it, showing resilience in the face of doubt. Durán didn't pretend no mas never happened. Instead, he lived with it, fought through it, and in the process created one of the most remarkable comeback stories the sport has ever seen. Though the boxing chapter finally closed, Durán's life was far from over. Fame, honor, and even personal struggles would follow him outside the ring, but that was the next fight in his story, the one that took place after the gloves came off. So, as great as his story inside the ring was, today, at 74, Roberto Durán faces struggles far darker than any opponent, tragedies that no fighter's fists could ever beat. Recent health complications, financial and economic situation. Time has a way of reminding even the toughest men that no one stays invincible forever. For Roberto Durán, the fighter who spent decades proving he could take any punch, those reminders did not come from opponents, but from his own body. In March 2024, at the age of 72, he faced one of his most frightening battles yet. Doctors diagnosed him with a complete atrioventricular block, a serious electrical problem in the heart that disrupts the way signals move between the chambers. Left untreated, it can cause irregular heartbeats, fainting, or worse. For Durán, who had survived hundreds of rounds in the ring, This was a fight he couldn't tough his way through. He needed surgery, and on March 18, 2024, he went under the knife to have a pacemaker implanted. The news shook fans across the world, many of whom had followed his story since the 1970s. The announcement from his family carried both fear and hope as they confirmed the seriousness of the condition, but also reassured supporters that the operation was totally successful. The next day, Durán himself appeared in a video posted to Instagram. Sitting in his home in Panama, looking calm and speaking softly, he thanked everyone who had sent him good wishes with a smile that suggested he was still the same warrior at heart. However, this wasn't the first health scare in recent years. In 2020, during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, Durán contracted the virus. Given his age and long history in the ring, many feared the worst, but instead, he weathered it with what doctors described as only mild symptoms. Even then, it felt like another example of his resilience. The man who had fought Leonard, Hagler, Hearns, and Barkley seemed to take on illness with the same quiet defiance. Still, each episode made it clear that the battles he faced now were not in arenas filled with cheering crowds, but in hospital rooms under the watch of doctors. At 74, Durán remains under regular medical care, his family watching closely over his routine and making sure travel is no longer part of his life. For someone who once toured the world as a champion, that adjustment hasn't been easy, but it is necessary. While his health tells one part of the story, another thread in Durán's later life has been his financial situation. Like many fighters who rise from poverty into sudden wealth, Durán experienced both extremes. During his peak in the late 1970s and 1980s, he earned millions from both sponsorship deals and the fame of being a champion. This put him in a position few in Panama had ever reached, but stories from that era also speak of lavish spending. He enjoyed life the way he fought, boldly and without holding back. Houses, cars, parties, and generosity to friends and family were part of the picture, and that lifestyle, combined with the realities of boxing's business side, eventually caught up with him. By 1989, even as he was still competing at the highest levels, reports showed that Durán owed $1.5 million in back taxes. According to one account, after paying off debts in Panama and other expenses, he was left with only $1,000 in the bank. The figure shocked many who assumed a world champion always lived like a millionaire. In truth, Durán's story wasn't unusual. Fighters often learned the hard way that the money could disappear as quickly as it came. Over the years, rumors swirled about his financial state. Some painted him as broke, others insisted he was fine, but Durán himself denied many of the harsher claims. What's certain is that he no longer lives the lifestyle of a man with endless millions. Instead, reports suggest his income in retirement has come from traveling to boxing events, meeting fans, and signing memorabilia. An Associated Press piece even noted that he constantly travels abroad to sign autographs and promote boxing events, making it clear that his presence alone still draws crowds. For fans, paying to meet Durán isn't about charity, it's about honoring a legend whose name carries weight wherever boxing is loved. In recent years, though, travel has slowed. His health and age have limited his ability to move around the world the way he once did, but that doesn't mean the support has disappeared. In Panama and abroad, fans still see him as a hero. His family, too, has been protective, ensuring that money rumors don't overshadow what matters most now: his health and his legacy. Media in Panama has echoed this, often focusing more on his hospital stays or public appearances than on speculation about his bank account. What's clear is that Durán's life today is far humbler than during his championship days. He doesn't live in excess, and he doesn't chase luxury. Instead, he has something he values more: the closeness of family and the loyalty of fans who have never stopped cheering for him. For a man who grew up in poverty, tasted wealth, endured debt, and still managed to carve his name into history, there is a kind of full-circle poetry to it. His greatest wealth now isn't measured in dollars, but in the love that surrounds him. In many ways, These later chapters of his story are as revealing as the fights themselves. They show a man who has faced not only opponents in the ring, but also the struggles of aging, of money, of health. Each time, his resilience has carried him through. The heart scare of 2024 may have slowed him, but it didn't break him. The financial challenges of the past may have humbled him, but they didn't erase his achievements. At 74, he remains a figure of endurance, not untouched by hardship, but defined by the way he meets it head-on. From no mass to his unforgettable comebacks, to the health battles he faces today, Duran's journey leaves us asking bigger questions. Should one moment define a legend's legacy? Is true greatness measured by victories or by the ability to rise after defeat? And in the end, what will history remember most about Hands of Stone? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share.